Rishi Sunak is the man most likely to be our next Prime Minister. I'm not even joking this time. While the rest of the country is figuring out if they can sell one of their kids in time to pay for their fuel bills in winter,
Working class.
Rishi Sunak is focus grouping which hoodie he should be perhaps wearing when he puts out the bins. Actually, he definitely pays someone else to do that for him.
Let me tell you a story.
Rishi Sunak is going to rebuild the economy. Man, he is going to be so angry when he finds out who's been running the economy for the last 2 years. It's time for change. It's time for someone who understands the common man and his problems. It's time for an Oxford-educated private schoolboy who worked at a hedge fund. And it certainly isn't time to change or even critically engage with the economic system that's delivered a land of electronically tagged cheese and honey. The first charge against Fishy Rishi. He enabled Boris Johnson. In 2019, Rishi Sunak was one of 3 Conservative MPs that wrote an influential column in The Times, calling for Boris Johnson to lead the Conservative Party.
Boris Johnson is one of the most remarkable people I have ever met. He has a good heart.
It strikes a strong contrast with Rishi Sunak's resignation letter. It talks of optimism, values, and Boris Johnson's credibility. It doesn't question Johnson's integrity, honesty, or suitability for the top job in Britain, all of which have been obvious faults for years. Johnson, when he was working in a newspaper, fabricated quotes. He lied about it to his editor and was sacked. Johnson had an affair. He lied about it to his boss at the Conservative Party, and then he was sacked. There's a pattern of behaviour here.
Making up quotes, lying to your party leader, wanting to be part of someone being physically assaulted. You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you?
This complete lack of morals, an unending willingness to lie and lie about lying, didn't spontaneously fall on Boris Johnson when he walked into Downing Street. Rishi Sunak did a deal with the devil. He thought Boris Johnson would win power, and he did win. So what if a few refugees get deported to Rwanda along the way? And as soon as it was obvious Johnson couldn't win anymore, Sunak resigned. It was never about character or integrity. It was about self-preservation. And he quit as soon as it was personally beneficial to do so. In fact, he registered his campaign website, readyforrishi.com, in December last year. He's been planning this for months. And while the country's been swallowed up in a cost of living crisis, Rishi's been worrying about how to get a promotion. So, let's look at his record. Sunak presided over a 50-year high in inflation, a GDP smashing collapse in trade to the EU after Brexit, and a doubling, soon to be tripling, of lecky bills as Chancellor of the Exchequer. His job was to manage the economy. Do you think he's done that well? And if somehow you think he has, well, take a look at your British gas bill in winter and then get back to me. You could say that all of these things are out of the Chancellor's control, that he's the victim of global events and trends on which he can do little about. I would ask if you extended the same courtesy or excuse to Gordon Brown and the last Labour government after the global financial crash, because the Conservatives certainly didn't.
The deficit we inherited from the previous government.
But even if you accept that argument, we are doing extraordinarily poorly by international comparison. The highest inflation and lowest forecast growth in the G7. Either the Chancellor and the Treasury are redundant, in which case, lob them in the bin, or he's done a really, really shit job. Do you think he deserves a second chance? What grand ideas were conjured up to confront our problems? Decrepit Thatcherism, writing off billions in fraudulent COVID loans, more flags. All this talk of financial crashes and self-serving enrichment, well, it's got me thinking about the City of London. You won't find much about this on Rishi Sunak's website, dear reader, but after stints at 40 grand a year Winchester College, Oxford, and then Goldman Sachs, the Chancellor worked at TCI. TCI is a hedge fund that played a significant role in the collapse of RBS. I won't get into the details. I'll just encourage you to revisit Margot Robbie's bath scene in The Big Short. Sunak and a TCI colleague went on to found their own hedge fund. That colleague was landed with an £8 million tax avoidance bill. The Chancellor has denied any involvement in this matter, or the TCI scheme. The point is, he's a born-to-rule Lord of the Manor. And despite what you might have heard about the collapse of feudalism in your history lessons, we are still very much living on his estate. In fact, we never really left.
And one of my best friends is from Eton or whatever.
You could see Rishi Sunak's mask slipping when he was challenged on his wife's continued involvement in Infosys, a company operating in Russia. Sunak had called for investors to divest from Russia, but said he was surprised he didn't go all Will Smith on the people criticising his wife for profiting from Putin's regime. The Chancellor has also devised a cunning plan that essentially taxes people for voting Labour. Sunak launched a scheme, meaning that social care will be paid for by a raise in national insurance. National insurance is a tax on workers' earnings. People who work pay national insurance, but don't need social care, and they largely voted for Labour in 2019. Whereas old people who do need social care, but don't pay national insurance, are more likely to vote Tory. Tory voters are no longer the slick city boys of the 80s that would have caved their own skull in if Mrs Thatcher asked them to. They've moved to the Shires and will need their asses wiped for them in a few years. And they'd still cave their skull in if we would bring back Thatcher from the dead. Let's go back to how Fishy Rishi became Dishy. When he wasn't being fawned over for being conventionally attractive, the superhero Chancellor sent the public's hearts aflutter by launching the furlough scheme, where the government paid 80% of people's wages who otherwise would have had to be laid off. The government spent a huge £70 billion on this, before it was abruptly ended in September 2021 to widespread concern. This was a hugely generous package, but there was a real oversight. 3 million people were simply excluded from government support by virtue of various self-employment quirks. Old-school Tory Sunak consistently claims that he's a low-tax conservative, despite the public facing the largest tax burden for close to 100 years. While people confront the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, the UK is the only major economy actually increasing the tax burden on its citizens. For years, Sunak kept Boris Johnson in Downing Street, and only quit when it started to hurt his own leadership ambitions. The economy is in bits. People are making impossible choices between food and fuel, and
we're all trying to find the guy who did this.
Turns out, it's the green card carrying non-domed multimillionaire who's decided to take a break from his California mansion so he can roleplay Prime Minister.